Welcome back to Just Liberty, where justice and liberty meet. I'm Alan Reinach, President of the Church State Council, here with my co-host Bettina Krause, editor of Liberty Magazine. And together, we are trying to take back liberty from the political extremes. Well, Bettina, it's just you and me today, and we're going to be talking about the Bible in public schools, mainly because Oklahoma has really catapulted this topic back in the news media and our consciousness with what's going on there and bringing the Bible back into public schools in that state. So why don't you begin and kind of lay out what's happening in Oklahoma, and then we'll try to give our listeners some context for this.
Sure. And this really began over summer when Oklahoma School Superintendent Ryan Walters issued a mandate. And this mandate said that all public schools in his state have to integrate Bible throughout all curricula. So that means using the Bible in history classes, in literature classes, even in math and science classes. And this mandate was in effect or has been given for classes from grade 5 through to grade 12. And, in introducing this mandate, he said immediate and strict compliance is expected. So he meant business. And, quite naturally, Alan, this hit the news because anything to do with religion in public schools these days is newsworthy. It creates waves. And quite predictably, it has created a controversy. So you have some on one side of the argument saying, yes, this is something that we need to reintegrate into schools. It helps with the moral development of students. It helps students understand the history of our nation better. Then you have others who are presenting a very different point of view. So, Alan, we felt that this topic was important enough to go deep today and really explore the historical background as well as the legal background. So why don't you give us that historical context?
Thinking about this, Bettina, I guess part of the context for me is the oft repeated attack on what the Supreme Court did in the 1960s, that somehow the Supreme Court kicked God and kicked the Bible out of public schools. Now, I have often said for many years, as long as there are math tests, there will be prayer in public schools. And, if you think about it, the Supreme Court may be the highest court in our country, and but our Constitution somehow did not give the court jurisdiction to tell God where to go. And as a believer in Scripture, it's my faith that says, well, God goes with me where I go, right? That I bring God with me, as it were, in my heart. So if I'm attending, like I did, a public law school, then God is with me in that law school. So the idea that you can kick, but I want to start there and go back. Okay, so the public schools, as we know it, were developed in the 19th century, and in the latter part of the 19th century, there was large-scale immigration from Roman Catholic countries, from Italy, from Ireland, right? And the public schools would have Bible readings from the King James Bible, and they were essentially Protestant schools. And the Catholics came, and they're like, well, this doesn't work for us. And there were actually battles in American cities like Cincinnati and Philadelphia over the King James Bible in the public schools. And, eventually the Roman Catholic Church started their own parochial school system and ever since have pressed for public funding for their schools. Now, uh, part of the rationale that the public schools were Protestant, that really ended by, the early 60s, 1960s, with the Supreme Court decisions addressing the separation of church and state and saying that the type of government prayer that was being conducted and the way that the Bible readings were doing um, was establishing, the Christian faith, and that was not constitutionally appropriate. Now, one of the things people are largely ignorant of is that the prayer that was at issue in the prayer case was a very sort of um, rote formal prayer. God bless our teachers, our families, our school, blah, 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 written by the Board of Regents. And it was recited every single day, the same words. And, for anyone who has any biblical literacy at all, you'll recall Jesus saying not to do that sort of thing, right? Not to be like the Pharisees and the hypocrites and make long prayers in public, to be seen, but to go in your closet and not to use what in the King James is called vain repetition, right? Vain repetition. And this was the definition of vain repetition. So did the Supreme Court say no to prayer or the Bible in public schools? No. But the distinction is between the government promoting certain religious beliefs and practices or the public schools educating about religion. And educating about religion has always been okay, but trying to inculcate religious belief, well, that's the job of our churches, our synagogues, our mosques. It's not, and if you think about it, Bettina, there's a lot of distrust of government in our country. It's kind of our birthright as Americans to say we don't trust, the government. And yet somehow we want to trust the government and our public schools with teaching our kids about religion, what to believe about God. That is just so incongruous to me. I just don't get it.
Right. And there's a lot of reasons why it's problematic for public schools to take on that responsibility that does belong in homes and in churches, not least because there are differing worldviews, religious worldviews. I mean, you talked about increasing immigration from Catholic countries. Well, since then, America has become an incredibly pluralistic society. I mean, every religion, every nationality, every ethnicity. And so trying to shoehorn, folk into a certain religious worldview in our public school is just not tenable. It's not feasible. Now,
so Bettina, on that point, I have talked to some Jewish friends, older folks who went to public school in the 1950s.
Right.
And they were basically put in the hallway when they'd have the prayer and the Bible reading in the classroom. They were excluded. They were ostracized. They were singled out. And that didn't feel good. They knew that they were different, right? And that's not the best of what America is about. It's not about making people feel like they don't belong.
No, absolutely. I mean, the foundational idea of religious freedom for me is do unto others, the golden rule, do unto others as you'd have them do to you, and making someone of a minority faith stand outside a classroom, or making a person who doesn't, subscribe to majority Protestant Christian views to sit through a lesson that is in essence proselytism for that worldview. That's not what I would want, for myself, why would I inflict it upon someone else?
So I've gotta illustrate the problem with something from my own family's experience. So, for the most part, we sent our kids to Seventh-day Adventist schools, to schools that taught our faith. But for a couple of years, um, there was a very fine Christian school that we sent the kids to that was not denominational. It was like a classic Christian education, very high academic standards. But I found out when it came to teaching Bible, what they had to do was simply read the Bible. And the reason they had to do that was because they had kids from families from many different churches, and the doctrinal differences among what were all some form of Protestant or evangelical church, the doctrinal differences were such that they couldn't even begin to talk about the interpretation or the application or the meaning because there just was no consensus and it would just cause conflict, you know and that was a startling experience for me. I thought surely there's things that we all agree on that we can teach.
But it's interesting, Alan, even that idea of simply reading the text, that is a very Protestant idea. It's not a Catholic idea because within the Catholic worldview, you read the text with, authoritative interpretations, in tandem with. Whereas the Protestant idea is you bring yourself to the text and you gain that meaning for yourself from the text. So even that choice to read the text without interpretation is reflective of a particular Protestant worldview. So, and it shows the pitfalls that are inherent in any attempt to teach Bible in a way that goes beyond merely, historical or literacy or literature or any other sort of neutral academic approach to teaching scripture.
If we haven't already lost some of our conservative friends, Bettina, I think it's important for us to put this in some kind of cultural context. I don't know what, crosses your email in basket, but I get stories about things that are going on, things that are being taught, and books that are in school libraries and that are being assigned that are not age appropriate, that are really outrageous. Books that contain explicit sex for, not even before junior high. And it's no wonder when, there's such degradation in our culture that there would be a push to say, we have to really bring the Bible back into the public schools. I get it. I totally get it.
No, and I understand that as well. And I think it's important that we make clear that we're not saying Bible shouldn't be taught in schools because we are hostile toward the Bible. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, teaching Bible in school, teaching Bible to children is important, but in the context of schools, it's dangerous on so many levels, not least because I think it drains the text of its inherent power. It makes it, I mean, when I come to the scripture, I come to scripture as something that's sacred, something that is life-changing, something that guides my everyday life. When it is taught in a school, with all the legal constraints that come with that, are you really exposing children to that sort of life-changing power of scripture that people seem to want to expose children to in schools? I mean,
well, I think some would say that what you call legal constraints need to be removed, right? But
right.
but put the law aside for the moment, or how the Constitution's been interpreted. Um, Take, for example, a public school teacher, and the assignment for the day is we're going to read the first two chapters of Genesis. Okay, so um, among our listening audience, I suspect that, like within the general public, we have a diversity of views on how we understand the first two chapters of Genesis. Was the creation very short period of time? Was it a longer period of time? Were each day of creation a literal day? Was each day 1,000 years? Was it an indefinite period of time? I think that the problem that we have is if we read Genesis 1 and 2 in a public school classroom, and the teacher teaches the kids that any one of those interpretations, well, some of those families are likely to have the same view, but some of those families would have a different view. And to me, I think it's more appropriate, and it's perfectly legal in the current legal framework, for the teacher to say, look, historically there are different ways of understanding this, and I'm not going to tell you which one is right, but we can take a look at all of these, and get the students to think about why they would favor one over the other, and to think about the text and its meaning and its application, but doing it in an objective manner without trying to stack the deck, in terms of one interpretation or another. I think, yes, biblical literacy is awful in this country. We all say we're Christian. We all say, we believe in God and we're going to heaven and all of that. Well, there's that old gospel song, everybody saying they're going to heaven. I forget how the line goes now. But not everybody who says they're going to heaven is going to heaven. So I'm all in favor of teaching Bible in public schools and having biblical literacy, as long as we do it the right way.
Right. And I think that doing it the right way, Alan, is very difficult indeed. And I think teachers need a level of training in that, which in the case of Oklahoma, I doubt very much that they are going to be given. You raised a point earlier, Alan, which I think we need to explore, and that is one of the reasons why we are seeing, these attempts to bring Christian instruction in different forms back into public schools is because there is a fear that public schools have been captured by an opposing ideology. There was a lawsuit filed recently by a group of parents making exactly that claim, saying that what they call leftist ideology is analogous to a religion, and that it is being established in our public schools, and thus it contravenes the First Amendment. That lawsuit didn't go very far, but I think it reflects an attitude and a fear that is not wholly without foundation, Alan.
Well, yeah, I didn't know if anything had been decided on that case, but I would have predicted it would go up in flames. And there were cases back in, I don't remember, decades ago, trying to call secular humanism somehow a violation of the Establishment Clause, and that's not going anywhere. But yeah, we live in a very polarized culture war climate, and I'm very proud of the fact that our church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, is really been actively committed to trying to reduce, the volume in these culture war battles and culture war shouting matches, and we're trying to find a way that we can all live in peace with our differing values. That's part of our commitment to religious freedom, but extending that principle more broadly than just religion to the fact that all of us, in a free country, we have a right to our own identity, our own values, and to live in peace with one another. We don't have the right to make other people believe what we believe. I have said that for too many Americans, religious freedom has become the freedom to believe as I do.
Right, exactly. Now, Ellen, going back to the legal aspects of what's happening in Oklahoma, for many, many years, we had a test called the Lemon Test. I think it emerged in the 1970s, and it really did control how activities in schools were interpreted, whether they crossed that establishment clause line. Did these activities have a secular purpose? Did they neither advance or inhibit religion? Or did they excessively entangle the government with religion? So this Lemon Test, in many ways, became a way of understanding whether religion in public school settings had crossed lines. As you know, Alan, the Lemon Test is no more. It's gone the way of all things. A case back in 22, Kennedy versus Bremerton, the Supreme Court said it's no longer good law. So given that,
right, where does that leave us?
Exactly. Where are we now? And how do you think, already there's been a lawsuit filed in Oklahoma by a group of parents worried about this mandate. Where do you see this going, given our current situation with the law?
So first off, disclaimer, I have no crystal ball. I'm not prone to making predictions. Okay. What the court has done to replace any kind of meaningful, legal analysis is to say, well, we're going to go with history and tradition. But the court has a consistent practice of making up history to achieve whatever result it wants to achieve. Now, when it comes to, say, Bible reading in the schools, so here's the $64,000 question. Which history are they going to go with? If they go with the history pre-1961, they're going to say, look, from the 19th century for 100 years, we had Bible readings in the schools, so therefore it must be okay. Well, that's not really a way that we do law. That's not law. But if they go with, well, in 61, in the last 60 years, we've had this other history. So it's anybody's guess. The reality is that the protection of our religious freedom is now mostly untethered from any sort of constitutional text or norm. And so there's really very, very difficult to predict. And, one way to think about why this is a problem, one of the reasons that the United States has the most vibrant economy of any country in the world is in part because of our legal system. Because our legal system makes doing business predictable. People can take risks. They know what the rules are. They know that they know the likelihood of enforcing the rules, right? It's not like so many countries where, you can pay off an inspector or a government official, but then you have to keep paying them off. And you don't know how much is going to be enough. And, because of corruption or what have you. And maybe I'm overstating the case, but, it's been a really significant part of our success. And constitutionally, when we have really taken the text of our Constitution seriously, it has stood us in good stead. Now, we're really sort of abandoning the real history of disestablishment, of saying, religion's not the business of government. I mean, that's the core premise. It's not just that we're not going to have a state church. That was one of the options. That option did not get voted. That was what wound up on the cutting room floor, no state church. Instead, it was a broad prohibition on all forms of establishment, funding of religion and promoting of religion, teaching of religion. The government, the recognition was religion is its own thing. It belongs to the people, belongs to the churches. It doesn't belong to the state. The state and the church are two different institutions in society, and the state's going to keep its hands off the church. And, to some extent, while, the church also, operates independently of the state. It's a mutual, spheres of autonomy.
Right. And both institutions will flourish better, in that circumstance.
Right. I mean, look at the alternative. Iran, for example, Saudi Arabia, for example, right? You can have Afghanistan under the Taliban. That's really the alternative, and that's what we certainly don't want to have here.
And I think this whole discussion that we're having, Alan, really comes back to a key misunderstanding and a key idea, which is, what is America? What is the American idea? Is America a nation that was created by Christians for Christians, in which case teaching Bible in public schools makes perfect sense? But if, on the other hand, you say America was created by folk who, many of them were Christians, but it was created for the purpose of developing a nation that would accommodate people of all faiths or no faiths, then teaching Bible in public schools makes no sense. So that core understanding of what America is really lies at the root of whether you think this is a good idea or a bad idea.
You're so right, Bettina. In fact, one of the very first programs I ever attended on religious liberty, the famous Jewish attorney Alan Dershowitz spoke to that very theme and asked the question, whose house is it? Whose house is the American house? Because if it's a Christian house, then he said, we Jews have no right to complain about crosses here and 10 commandments there and, all the trappings of Christianity and what have you, if it's the Christian's house. But if America belongs to all of us, then, nobody gets favored treatment. It's really that simple. And we are out of time. I sure have enjoyed this conversation with you.
It has been really interesting, Alan. And I think this topic, religion in schools, is going to be one that we keep coming back to in various forms. I can't believe we already have 2 seasons of Just Liberty done and dusted. And, looking back, I'm looking at the range of topics we've covered, the variety of people we've talked to. I mean, it's been a massive range of issues, right?
Absolutely. And, we're taking a little break over the holidays. It's a wonderful time for our listeners to go back and catch up on some of what they've missed.
So, for anyone who is looking to keep up with what's happening in the world of religious liberty in 2025, we hope you'll join us here on Just Liberty as we start season 3, January 7. That's our first episode. And we want you to become part of our continuing mission to try to take back the idea of religious liberty from the political extremes.